welcome to Krav Life. I'm your host, Paul Simos, and today on Train to Fight, we're interviewing Mr. Dave Friedman. Now, Dave joins us all the way from Australia for the second time on the show, and I can't wait to catch up and talk to him. So stay tuned for that. Now, one of the things that I love about working here at Krav Life is the sense of community, right? So we get to network with Kravists from all over the world, and I want to reach out to as many Kravists as I can and network with them. So I want to network with you too. So I want you to join our Krav Life community network, right? So if you join the network, it's basically a place where Kravists like you and I can network and discuss everything Krav Maga related. Plus, we drop profiles on different Kravists. We have articles in there and training, and there's a lot more as well. And the best part of all, it's all for free. So just go to mykravlife.com and sign up for the free community and start networking with Kravists from all over the world. And while you're there, be sure to check out our Krav Maga directory and find a place to train near you. So without further delay, here is Mr. Dave Friedman. All right. So welcome, sir. Welcome to the show. How are you doing? Or welcome back to the show, actually. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks to be back. And I've been watching a lot of your interviews since I was lucky enough to be on the first time. So it's really interesting listening to all the Kravists around the world. Some really good content you put on.
Well, thank you. So we definitely try to get different perspectives on things and basically just introduce people to each other, right? Because that's how Krav Maga is going to progress. No problem. For the people that don't know who you are, can you give us a brief introduction into yourself?
Sure. So my name is Dave Friedman. I am the owner and chief instructor of Krav Maga Australia in Melbourne, Australia. Krav Maga Australia has been open since 2010. I took it over in 2018. So we've had it for about 3.5 years now. I've been teaching Krav Maga. I did my first instructor qualification in 1997. So I've been teaching for a fair while, but always more as a side hobby, a supplementary income. Only since 2018 did it become my primary business, my primary source of income.
Perfect. And
excuse me,
yeah, not a problem. And who did you learn Krav Maga from?
So I'm qualified under the Krav Maga Alliance Association, which is based in Los Angeles under John Whitman. I'm also qualified under Combat Krav Maga, which is the Offenbach, based in Israel, as well as the direct qualification from Wingate.
Perfect. Both Lior and John have been on the show.
Yes, I listened to both the interviews.
They're both really good guys. So some awesome training there
Absolutely
for you.
Amazing.
So can you give us they both men had very, very interesting things and perspectives to say. How do you find both organizations without putting anybody down or anything like that?
First of all, I'd never put anybody else down. So even if you try to tempt me, I wouldn't. They're both fantastic. I think everybody approaches Krav or life for that matter from different perspectives based on personal experiences, and you bring those experiences with you. Same as when I teach. So besides being Krav, I've worked in counterterrorism for 17 odd years or so, and I bring a lot of my experiences and my personal experiences into what I teach. I used to compete in Muay Thai as well. I bring some of those personal experiences as to what I discovered about myself in the ring into what I teach, as do both John and Lior. They're both fantastic. I think they come from different backgrounds and different, different personal experiences. And I learn from everybody that I learn under. You're always the student, sometimes the teacher.
And I definitely think you hit it right on the head there, is that each person that teaches Krav Maga has a different experience, a different background that they bring to it, and no one one instructor can have all the answers in Krav Maga. We have to look to each other, right? Because you said you have counterterrorism experience. Well, I don't have counterterrorism experience, so I would definitely have to defer to you as more of an expert in that field, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your counterterrorism days?
Not too much, to be honest. But I worked both in South Africa and in Australia when I came here. I was never part of law enforcement in those countries, but I helped consult,
Okay.
train, advise to law enforcement, particularly working around working within the Jewish communities in those countries and protecting the Jewish communities against anti-Semitic acts of terror.
Okay. So how did you find the difference between working with groups in South Africa versus Australia?
Very different. I think there's very different levels of mentality. I think there's very different levels of intellect. If I can be if I can be honest, you're really dealing with sort of a first world country versus a third world country, in terms of sort of political systems and levels of reaction, or proactiveness, should I say. But along with that, there's also a very different mindset amongst your everyday civilians. South Africa is a high crime society. Every single person has what I would call basic self-defense or self-protection 101 mindset in South Africa, because any civilian at any time knows that they are a potential victim of a violent and armed assault. So you have, basic levels of just 101 situational awareness, because it can happen anytime. Anytime you're in your car, anytime you stop at a traffic light, anytime you go to a restaurant to eat, there's a chance someone's going to run in with a gun and conduct an armed robbery. Australia doesn't have that. So, I'd suggest the authorities on a sort of a higher level, but your average civilians are on a much lower level in terms of just general situational awareness. And I suppose the mindset there might actually become a victim of any sort of crime, be it low-level muggings or high-level counterterrorism or terrorist incident. So it's, on one hand, it's probably easier to work with authorities. It's a lot harder to work and train your average civilians. And when you're working in a community, like I said, I was working in the Jewish community, a big part of that was trying to train the community members to be aware of potential incidents and how they can react and add assistance to those incidents. And again, in South Africa, there's a natural high level of situational awareness based on the average general crime you have there. In Australia, it's very low, so it can be more challenging in that respect.
Yeah, and a lot of self-protection experts, they talk about that people that grow up in more violent areas have like a thicker file folder of references to help them along, and they actually do better when they're in the armed services, because they already know what to look for versus someone that never grew up with any of that. And it makes total sense.
Absolutely. Number one, they know what to look for. I agree with you. But number two, I think it's very different where you've grown up with it being a very real possibility that it may happen. And therefore, when you're learning skills, you're learning skills because, again, this may happen to me at any stage. Whereas Australia, even with my Krav students, a lot of the students learn Krav and they want to learn self-defense, and they want the practical self-defense element of Krav Maga versus traditional martial arts. But a lot of them will come into it wanting sport and fitness and think, well, if I'm going to learn that, I might as well get my physical exercise in while learning practical self-defense. But the average student probably still doesn't actually believe that they might become a victim of a crime, or certainly not to the same extent that the average person in South Africa does. Because in South Africa, the chances are, if you have when I'm in my Krav school here and I'm teaching and I have 30, 35 students on the mats, maybe 5 of them have become a victim of crime of some sort. And even then it's probably more personal, domestic related crime. In South Africa, I have 35 people on the mats, probably 20, 25 of them had become, had been personal victims of crime. And the other 5 or 10 were first generation from a victim. So it's a very different mindset, knowing that it can and likely will happen versus this is good to know, but chances are hopefully I won't actually need it.
So how can we help, people from, I guess, first world countries or societies that are less violent, like Australia or Canada and even the United States? How do we help them become more situationally aware, like they are in South Africa and nations like that?
Look, I think to a degree, and I might regret saying this, to a degree there'll be a limit as to what you can teach, because if something is not a personal experience to you, it's always going to be hard to break a certain boundary until something happens.
Right.
And that goes to anything, from driving a car to personal safety to anything. Once you experience something, they say experience is the one thing you get the second after you need it. Once you've experienced something, then your mindset towards that event is changed forever because you've experienced it. But I think the way we do it is we try and teach effectiveness. We try and put our students into role play scenarios, and we ask our students for stories, and we say, does anybody here have a story that happened to them? And either the student will tell the story in front of the students, or might just tell me privately, and then I'll relay that story without mentioning names. But we'll try and give stories and go, well, here's what happened. Here's what happened to one of our students. Here's what they did. Let's role play that on the mats now, because now we know it's a real possibility because it happened to someone standing on the mats right now. Now let's role play it, and we'll role play and we'll see how that could have, where could situational awareness have helped them to prevent it from happening in the first place? How could they have de-escalated once the confrontation started? If the de-escalation doesn't work and it goes to confrontation, where did the Krav techniques come in? So we'll take an incident, and the incident might have gone in one direction, but we'll say, right, let's now look at the 4 or 5 other directions it could have gone in, and let's play out all those scenarios, so that, because what happened to person A, it might happen differently to person B. And let's see if what we've been teaching you over the last couple of days, weeks, months, would it have helped you in this situation? If not, why not? And how can we learn from it? We'll show videos very often. We mentioned earlier that we both watch the John Career's ASP channel on YouTube. What I'll often do from that is if there's a video that I believe relates to my students, I'll download that video and I'll play it to my students. The other day we're teaching defense against rear naked chokes, and John Career had a video of I think a teenage girl who was walking up to her apartment block, and a male came from behind her and choked her out, put her down, took her phone and left. And I played that video. I said, well, here's what we've learned. Here's how easy this can be implemented. And if you look, she had no situational awareness. You can see the guy actually following her for a period of time. She has no idea he's there because she's on her phone until she feels his hands around his neck, and 4, 5, 6 seconds, she's passed out. Luckily, all he took was her phone, and that was the end of that. And this is now to a teens class. I'm saying, well, this is a 14-year-old girl, which is the average age of you on the mats now. This is how it can happen. So I'll try and bring in those realistic, or those videos, somewhat so there's a visual image to hopefully try and hit home a little bit more to the students, without scaring tactics. We don't want to scare tactics. We want to bring home a realistic, healthy level of awareness and concern. But the last thing we want to do is have somebody not leave their house because they're too scared to, because of we've put that fear of God into them. So it's always a fine balance, and you can do what you can do, but ultimately, sorry, Paul, apologize for that.
No problem.
Ultimately, there's only so much you can do, and and the reason why people like me immigrate to Australia from South Africa is because it is a much lower level crime society, and we hope it's more training and practice than reality, and that's why people like me are here.
Yeah, so because I was going to say that, like, would there be a value in showing video, right, to people in countries like Australia, so that they can sort of see what happens and empathize a little bit with the situation, and then kind of figure it out from there. But you totally answered the question, so that was
but even
that was
then,
awesome.
There's always an element of, that's America, or that's South Africa. That's different. We don't live in those societies, which is why whenever I can, if there's any personal story that any of my students have, I'd rather share those, because those hit home a bit easier. Or if there's obviously anything from the news, in Australia, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had 4 stabbings over the course of one weekend, which is already unheard of. and all in different parts of Australia. But I took those news bulletins, we put it together into a thing, and we then did a session on knife defense. But it was, quickly saying, here's what happened this past weekend. There's been multiple stabbings. This is why let's focus on knife defense now. So, even if I've got a syllabus plan, but there's something happens that's topical, I'll change my syllabus to, strike while the iron's hot, so to speak.
And the students find value in that style of teaching?
I believe so. I think I find a good balance, as I said, between not using scare tactics, but trying to give the students what they need, both physically and mentally, to prepare themselves, or even better, prevent themselves from becoming a victim of crime. I hope so. I'd say the feedback I get is the fact that, I mentioned to you earlier, we've come out of COVID. We were locked down for 13 out of 19 months, and yet we still managed to double our student base in that time and expand into another building next door. Despite the fact that we were, literally closed for 13 months in an 18-month period. So I would take that feedback as my students enjoying what I'm doing and they believe in it. And we have a really, really good word of mouth referral. So I'll take those positive feedback, but of course, not everything is for everyone. And no doubt there are some students who don't agree with what I teach and how I teach it, and that's okay. But based on how our numbers are going, I'd suggest we're doing okay.
Now, where I am, we're seeing like a rise in mental health problems, and with that, a rise in drug use and an increase in violence. Right, like violence that we never really saw before. Is the same sort of thing starting to happen in Australia? Is that what you think is feeding the expansion and interest in Krav Maga?
I think so. I think Australia's always had a bit of a drug problem. Again, I've only been here 14 years, so I can't comment on anything further back than that. But I think Australia does have a drug problem. And that is probably the leading cause to the majority of violence that does happen in Australia, whether it's violence due to people being on drugs or violence due to people committing crimes to get money for drugs. Yeah. But I think drugs are certainly at the heart of a large level of crime in Australia. So yes, and again, we've got people coming to us. Some people work as nurses in psych wards. And they experience violence on a regular basis from patients. We have, a number of frontline emergency workers, be it police or AMBOs, that come to us as well. It's scary how many of our AMBOs or paramedics experience violence while trying to help people. It's not something I enjoy hearing about, but so we have quite a few AMBOs that come to us because they get no self-defense training at all. Police get some self-defense training, and you can expect them to be in the front line. Paramedics are there to save people's lives. They don't get any self-defense training, yet they experience a huge amount of violent encounters. So a lot of those paramedics take it upon themselves to get themselves some self-defense training, and therefore we have quite a few of our members in that field. But yeah, absolutely, I think it is on the rise, and I think Krav Maga is on the rise in terms of people understanding its practicality and effectiveness in a street-based self-defense confrontation, as opposed to some traditional martial arts, and particularly those traditional martial arts who don't incorporate a self-defense package into what they teach. So I think a lot more martial arts are trying to. Some I might agree with, some I might agree with less in terms of what they're teaching under the self-defense banner. But I think a lot more traditional martial arts are trying to at least market themselves or add a self-defense component into their overall syllabus. And some do it very well, and some unfortunately not so well.
Yeah, we've all seen the ones that are not so well, and it's sad because they're actually putting their clients in more danger because of a false sense of hope, or a false sense of security.
Yeah, look, it's an absolute pet peeve of mine. I'm trying to be quite restrained now while talking to you, as opposed to my true feelings and some of what I see out there. But it is an absolute pet peeve of mine when I see what I believe is, people training others to die, really.
Yeah. Well, the
And a
only.
lot of that comes from, I just watched your interview with Mark Stein. A lot of that
Mm,
comes from martial arts instructors not understanding what happens to the body in high stress situations, not understanding the adrenaline dump, the fight or flight mode, the freeze mode, etc. So, a lot of these martial arts have these very intricate finger holds and finger releases. Don't understand, when the body gets rid of
yeah.
fine motor skills under the adrenaline dump. So what's great on the mats and great with a cooperative partner when there's no stress is
Mhm.
completely impractical for a street-based self-defense system.
And it goes back to what we were talking about before with the experience, right? And I imagine that this stuff happens because I remember my own experience because I started in karate, and it would always, I think the instructors there get put on the spot, and I don't know about other systems, but I know in the system of karate that I was in, um, it was kind of a bad thing if you were a black belt or a high level instructor to not have an answer, right? Like I never once had an instructor where I've asked, oh, well, what would you do about this? And they said, well, I don't know. Let me go find out. Right? They'd rather make something up on the spot rather than admit that they didn't know. And I think maybe that's might be part of the problem is they're being asked by their students, well, how would I defend myself against this? And an instructor without any experience of violence or ever been in that situation now has to come up with something, right?
I agree with you, but I'll even take that one step further, even within Krav. And the reason why, well, number one, as I mentioned before, I'm trained under a few different Krav Maga federations, but also a bit of a Muay Thai background in judo as a kid as well. And I think it's important for Krav Maga instructors to know different Krav Maga systems or certainly different martial arts systems, because it does help your students. So two things I wanted to talk about there is, number one, the reason why I'm not affiliated is because I don't want to be limited to what I can teach. There's some things from John Whitman's Krav Maga Alliance Federation that I love and that I teach and I think are great. And there's some things from Combat Krav Maga that I teach. And I want the freedom to be able to pick and choose what I want to teach, what I believe is most practical for my students, but also what I might teach to a 6'2", 85-kilogram male might be slightly different to what I teach to a 5'1", 46-kilogram female.
Right.
Because they've got different body types and they might need different techniques for the same situation. And I want to have the flexibility to be able to do that and give my students what I believe is the best for them, not what I have to do because I'm paying an affiliation fee to somebody and therefore can only teach their techniques. So that's the one aspect, and the reason why I'm not affiliated to any one association. As much as I respect them all, I don't affiliate to anyone. But the second thing is even just understanding as many different martial arts and systems as you can out there. One of my absolute pet peeves, and I experienced this once as a student, is when you go to an instructor and you go, why do we do this? Or why do we do a roundhouse kick with a bent leg versus a straight leg or vice versa? And the instructor just says, because that's how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
That to me just shows a lack of knowledge. Where to say, well, Muay Thai has a bent leg round kick, Krav Maga has a straight leg round kick. He has the benefits to both. Here's why one's better than the other. Or, this, we do this because of this. Even, so I took on some students, for example, that came from a gym that were associated to Krav Maga lines. And some of the techniques that we teach for those defenses are different. I don't teach the Krav Maga lines techniques. I teach the combat Krav Maga techniques. So the students who come from that system go, well, Dave, we learned this. I go, yes, I know you learned that because that's Krav Maga lines, which is great. This is why I choose this technique over that technique in this instance, for example. And the fact that I know both techniques or a few techniques can explain the pros and cons for each one and explain why I've chosen this one, I think is better, without trying to be arrogant, I think makes me a better all-round instructor because I'm able to give my students more information. But ultimately, I'll say to my students, so now you know both techniques. You know my thoughts as to why I'll choose A over B, but now go practice both and then choose one. And whichever one you think works best for you, choose that one and then train the hell out of that one. And I say to my students, when it comes to grading, if I say, okay, now do a release from a two-handed choke, and you do technique A as opposed to technique B, if it is effective, and I believe would be effective within a street-based context, I'll still pass you, because it's not about me, it's about my students. And if that's more natural to their instinct, A, because it's their natural instinct, or B, because they've trained it for so long, that's become their natural instinct, I'm not going to change them. Remember, that's how Emil Lichtenfeld first created Krav Maga. He came from a variety of martial arts background. He then tried to look at people's natural reactions to certain things, and he created techniques from his background based on people's natural instinctive reaction. Because if something is naturally instinctive to you, A, you're going to learn it quicker, and B, you're going to be able to implement it quicker because it's your natural instinct. So if I want you to do A, but B is your natural instinct, and B is still effective for you, then by me trying to untrain you into something else is going against the whole principles of what Krav Maga was designed around. So I'll never do that again, which is why I don't want to be affiliated to any one organization. But by having the knowledge of the different techniques, I can at least explain the why. And I say this a lot to my students. If you can understand the why, the how becomes a lot easier. If you know what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve that, the how becomes easier. But if you don't understand the why, if you don't understand the concept or what you're actually trying to get to, or your end result, it's a lot harder to learn the processes to get there. So as an instructor, I believe we should have as much all-round knowledge as possible, because the more of the why we know and the more variety we know, and we can explain the why to our students as to why this is better than that, or why we chose this over that. It might not be better, but why we chose it. I think our students will respect us more for it, and most importantly, we're giving them more knowledge for them to make the right decisions for them at the time when there's no time to think.
Yeah. And I completely agree with what you're saying there, that, maybe, this technique works better for this type of person, and then another technique works better for another type of person. And then they go and they practice, the hell out of it until, it becomes second nature, and then that becomes their go-to defense. But then going one step further to that is, let's say you got that 6'5" guy, and he can do more obviously than a 5' female. But what if when he gets older, right? And maybe he has an injury where he's not as mobile. Well, now he may need to change that technique to something different that's going to work for him, because the one thing that I always liked about Krav Maga is, unlike other martial arts where you have to adapt to the martial art, Krav Maga adapts to you, right?
100%. Yes.
And it should change for that guy, and then he practices whatever new technique will work better for him.
Correct. In the same way we have people come to us with injuries. People come to us who have had hip replacements or bad hips. For example, the tactical get up off the ground, where you get up and you bring your foot underneath your body. People with hip issues just can't do that. So I can spend hours, days, weeks, months till kingdom comes, and they're just never going to get it because their body just can't do it. They have an injury or they have issues. As you say, we need to adapt to them and find a technique that's going to work best for them, because when they are in the street-based confrontation, they're on the ground, it's got to be what's going to keep them safe. And even if it's not the best way out there, it's the best for them.
Yeah, and that'll be the hallmark of a good instructor, and like you said, the advantage of training under multiple different instructors is that you get to learn a whole bunch of different ways, right? And where you yourself might do one particular way, right? You do have that knowledge base to say, well, this doesn't work for you the way I do it, but here, try this. Maybe this will work. Maybe we can modify or tweak it this way.
Correct. Agreed. Absolutely. So I'm very big on that. As I believe we all should be, because again, it's what you teach shouldn't be about the teacher. What you teach has to be about the student.
Yeah, and then of course, we definitely pressure test it and make sure that it does work for them for real, and it's not just some theoretical thing. And then we've done our job of making sure that we've given them the tools to go home safe.
Correct. So we go through, we go through the stage of learning, the practice, training, and drilling.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, yeah.
For sure. All right, sir. Well, you know what? This was definitely a very interesting conversation with you. So, if anyone wanted to get into contact with you, train with you, what is the best way that people can reach out to you?
Thank you. So we're based in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, in Moorabbin, for those listening from Australia. The best would be to go via our website, which is Krav Maga Oz, KravMagaOz.com.au. Have a look at our website, have a look at what we teach. We've got a contact form on the page that you can complete and send to us, and we'll normally get back to you within 24 hours. And provide you with all the information that you are looking for. So KravMagaOz.com.au.
And do you also do online training for people? Like, let's say there's someone in the United States that wants to seek you out. Would you do online training for them?
We don't anymore. We did during all those lockdowns. And the reason why we managed to keep all our students and, in fact, grow during lockdowns is that we still offered a full online program 6 days a week. Unfortunately, we don't at the moment. We tried or considered a bit of a hybrid once we were allowed back in. But if I'm honest with you, number one, it was a bit difficult to teach people live on the mats and people on the screen at the same time. And number two, we've just grown so much. We've had to expand our timetable at the moment. We also do a lot of work in schools and in corporates, teaching self-defense and all-around personal safety to staff and employees. So we just don't really have the time to offer separate online classes without people being on the mat at the same time. And like I said, teaching online on the mat at the same time just didn't work. Unfortunately, both groups of people end up losing out too much. So yes, unfortunately, we do have all our online sessions we ran during lockdown are available on our website for people to view and go into, but we're not conducting any more online sessions at the moment.
Well, I guess I'll just have to fly to Australia and train with you in person.
There we go. And come visit this beautiful country.
There we go. So I always wanted a reason to go to Australia. There we go.
You got one now, Paul.
For sure. All right, sir. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and definitely I'd like to have you back on again for third time.
Always a pleasure. Always happy to make more time for you, Paul. Thank you.
All right. You take care.
You too. Thanks, Paul.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Friedman for being on the show again, and I want to thank you for listening. Now, if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and a review. And to catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at my_Krav_life and on Facebook and YouTube by simply searching My Krav Life. All right. So once again, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time on Train to Fight.